Today, we welcome Rob Hemming to the Camp Owners Podcast. Kelly and I are going to talk about doing your due diligence when you're buying a camp, all the insight and expertise from a well-known and experienced professional in the camp industry. Thanks for joining us on the Camp Owners Podcast. Welcome to the Camp Owners Podcast, a space for camp owners to talk about the unique aspects of camp ownership and get inspired by each other. We're going to sit down with camp industry experts, leaders, and fellow camp owners to hear how the camp dream transpired for them, learn from each other, and discuss some of the biggest issues in the private camp industry. Hi, everyone. My name is Howie Grossinger, and I'm the co-owner of Camp Robin Hood, a day camp in the suburbs of Toronto.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kelly Shuna, and I'm the co-owner and executive director of Hidden Pines Ranch Day Camp located in Stillwater, Minnesota. If you're looking to find and subscribe to the Camp Owners Podcast, you can either find us online at gocamp.pro/ownerspod or by searching for us in your favorite podcast app. Finally, if you're listening to this and think it would be useful to other camp owners or aspiring camp owners in your circle, please feel free to send them a note to listen.
Amazing. Well, we get right down to business right away by thanking our sponsors, and we have two wonderful sponsors. The first one we always love to thank is Camptivities. Imagine yourself ending a call and your mind is spinning. Who can do scheduling for us? How will you find the time to train that person? You have all the information in your own head to explain all of the nuances and details that make sure that your schedules come out the right way. Well, the only people who really know anything about scheduling at your camp already have a lot on their plate. Typically means late nights each week to get the scheduling done. But we've got a solution for you. Our friends at Camptivities are the people you need to seek out and talk to. If you're interested in manual adjustments, rainy day scheduling, a ton of customizable settings, Camptivities is your place. I just recently had my catch up with our friends at Camptivities, and I am so impressed with where the platform is right now, and my team is really looking forward to prepping for 2022 and having the best schedules we've ever had this coming summer. Let Camptivities help you get away from your desk and back out into camp. Think about your organizational continuity and stop relying on one person to make your summer schedules. Visit Camptivities at camptivities.com. They would love to talk to you, and please set up a time to chat. Kelly, great to see you. I hope all is well.
Great to see you too, Howie. I don't know when this is going to air, but happy holidays.
Yes, happy holidays to you and to all of our friends out there. We're definitely into a new chapter, obviously, in the pandemic, and we just wanted to wish everyone a safe and happy holidays as we continue to navigate this very interesting time in our lives. But Kelly, we are in the mode of doing episodes that look at the business of camp. And we have recently done an episode on buying a camp and had a wonderful feedback on that. And we thought it would be appropriate to continue that conversation. And thank you for allowing me the opportunity to introduce Rob Hemming to us, who is today's guest. Rob is someone who has been representing buyers and sellers of camps for over 25 years, a camp professional for over 40. Rob is, and he's only 42, but so it's amazing that he's done this. But Rob is a successful real estate agent up here in Canada and actually has particular expertise in facility and operations. He has consulted and brokered many camp purchase deals over the years. And we feel that he is the perfect guest to give us insight on the due diligence necessary when buying a camp, day or overnight. We are so thrilled to have Rob. Welcome to the Camp Owners Podcast, Rob.
It's great to be here, Howie and Kelly. It's fantastic. I was not aware that this was going on, and when I got your message and saw it all, I was just totally impressed. I'm really looking forward to helping you folks out today.
Well, that's wonderful. We're really excited that you're here. You know, Rob, as part of every episode, we allow our guests to give our audience just a brief history of their origin story in camp. How did it all start for you? And I know we have a finite amount of time, and you've got lots to tell everybody. But just just if you can give us a sense of where it all began and how you find yourself where you are now in your relationship with the camp industry.
Okay, great. I mean, as I say, I could do 45 minutes on that. But I started actually as a camper with YMCA camps and YMCA residential camps, and went through the YMCA leadership development programs. And that was YMCA Hamilton Burlington, YMCA Wanakita. And it was 1962 when I first went to camp, 62, 63, way back when, before you guys were born. And then, became a counselor, went through the counselor training and did all that, and then worked up in administration and became assistant director at Wanakita up until 1974. And then I left and helped establish, with a couple of Wanakita alumni, a camp for learning disabled and behavior disordered children. And that was down in Ontario, in the southern Ontario, near Fort Erie. And then we did that for special needs for 6 years. And then I came back and directed Wanakita from 1980 to 86, and then moved over to work with Ontario Camp Leadership Center, which was Bark Lake Leadership Center. And it was a camp that was run by the Ontario government, by the provincial government, in training camp leaders across the province. So all camps in Ontario could send their leaders to Bark Lake, and we would help train them. And we would work with teachers, we would work with professionals, and we would work with the young leaders, 15 to 17-year-old people kids who wish to become counselors and camp leaders in the future. And did that for a while, and got a chance at that time, because I was also the camping consultant for the Ministry of Culture, Tourism and Recreation, got a chance to look over the entire province of Ontario. And it's a big province with over 1,000 camps in the province, between day camps, residential camps. And I got to visit from the very north of Ontario to the very south of Ontario and work with a variety of organizations in the development of their camping programs. Did that for 10 years, had a great time. Then I had to leave that because the government actually decided it wasn't going to be in the business of doing that anymore, and moved on and went back to my roots and managed an environmental wildlife center after that, and started an environmental day camp. This was in the 90s when environment really wasn't such a big deal, and had a great time doing that. Then I kept getting calls from a bunch of folks about consulting, because I had developed all these great contacts with camps across the province, needing some advice on what to do. So I got my real estate license, and ever since then, since just over 20 years ago, I've been helping camps and organizations in the development of their sites and properties, and in helping to buy and sell. And now I'm with, and my wife is the broker owner of our brokerage, Realty Executives, and on the Bay, and I just work for her. That's the best way to put it.
Yep.
Sounds like a great setup there for you, Rob. Wow, you have so much experience with camping, and I love that it's such a variety, from camper to counselor to startup to leadership training. That's incredible. Wow, Howie. We could talk with Rob about many more things, it sounds like, than just due diligence.
Well, there's no doubt about that. And, just on a side note, Rob was instrumental in helping my group find the property that we ultimately purchased as our overnight camp. But Rob was incredibly instrumental in a time when, as some people who may be listening, were looking at just buying a bare property and trying to envision how you can make this work for an overnight or a day camp. So we're really lucky up here. And I know that there are people across North America who serve similar roles in supporting and consulting people to do what he does. But we're really lucky to have Rob on board to talk about this topic for sure.
Absolutely. So Rob, taking all that into account,
Mhm.
let's start with talking about due diligence. So especially for those that are thinking about it, whether it's in the near future or long-term dream for them. Describe for us what due diligence is specifically when buying a camp?
That's a great question. The issue that I get every year, I have at least a dozen people call me. I went to camp as a kid and I loved it. I just need to, and I'm not happy in what my career is. I want to buy a camp and I want to move forward and get a camp and go back to that great feeling that I had at camp. Now, you and I may know that that may not be what may happen in the long run, but they have all this passion. And it's the passion that I hear all the time on the phone. And, you know, the first thing I say to them is that you need to consider before you even begin to look at properties and do all that sort of thing, you need to get your headspace in around owning a camp and get your headspace around the difference between being a staff member at a camp, and you know what it's like to just be a staff member at a camp and not have any real responsibility to manage, but just having fun as a staff with the kids and all the programs and that sort of thing, but not having many of the headaches that ownership brings. And so I tend to do a lot of consulting in just getting them their headspace around due diligence around what it is to own a camp. And that's really the biggest role I tend to make with a dozen people who call me every year to buy a camp. And, you know, and they all have this, you know, big thing about, well, I really just want to get back into that lifestyle. And I said, do you realize that that lifestyle is going to be even more hectic than your current career? And, you know, all those things. And so I go through that whole due diligence with them. And so due diligence is not just, you know, checking out to make sure you get everything off a checklist before you buy. Due diligence is it starts with getting your head in the right space to be able to understand what it is and all the aspects of camp ownership, from property to financial to staffing to all those things. And whether it's private, whether it's public, whether it's not for profit, any of those, all those three different types of operations have different ways of looking at due diligence. So, I mean, I get organizations calling me still, you know, they're either faith organizations or not-for-profit organizations that serve special needs. And they want to get into having a camp experience for their client base. And I always do due diligence with them. It doesn't have anything to do about money necessarily. It has to do with getting in the right space in your head about what it means to get into it and own a property and run with it.
It sounds like that effort that you, or that exercise you take people through, is so important. I often call it, Kelly, you know, the romance that people have with the camp experience because they saw it in a movie, or they saw it, you know, on an after school special, or some silly program that sort of glorified aspects of camp that they want to return to. But, you know, I think, and we've had this, you know, in our previous episode with Dan, he talked a lot about as well about really understanding what you're getting into, you know, that this is, you know, it is a huge commitment with so many aspects to it that you really need to appreciate that. So Rob, when you think about that aspect, and let's say you've done your part in getting a person to truly think about whether they want to go down this road, you know, what are some of the things that you sort of explore with them as you look towards either finding an existing property, an existing camp, etc., that you know will help them figure out if this is the right thing for them to do?
Well, again, that's great. Pre-offer due diligence. Okay. And when I say pre-offer, you know, you before you really deal with offering, because everybody wants to buy a camp. So what does buy a camp mean? Well, you got to put an offer in and buy a camp. And that's the fundamental base of the whole thing, you know, down to, you know, the square nubs. It's fundamental base. I want to buy a property and buy a camp, or buy a camp. May not buy a property because the camp may be running on leased land, but I want to buy a camp. And so I said, okay, let's do your pre-offer due diligence. So what area do you want? What's the area and neighborhood you want to do this in? That's a really big, how far away? Now, in Ontario and in other urban centers across North America, which is where, there is a large majority of the residential camping and or day camping movement. The issue is you have a certain client base in a certain area that they're coming from. I know that if you're in Canada and in Ontario specifically, because it's got the largest concentration of day and residential camps in Ontario, there is a significant client base around the Golden Horseshoe around the Great Lakes. And that's where the major population is. So you want to be within an area that would service that population. That's where a majority of folks. But certain private camps, certainly around North America, especially in the States, have their campers come from all over the country and all over the world. So they don't need to have a specific area or neighborhood that they're going to focus in on. And so, they focus on the world and marketing their product in that, and anybody from around the world can attend. So they don't have an area or neighborhood. So if you want to buy a house, Kelly, Howie, you want to buy a house, there are certain areas in your communities that you want to buy that in. There are certain areas you don't want to buy that in. And so, that's what I ask first. And then the next thing I ask is, how much money do you really have? And they say, well, I've got this much money. And I said, add $1 million onto it right away. And they go, what do you mean? And I said, well, if you have this much money to buy a camp, that's great, but you're going to need $1 million to get underway and start up after that. You got to have that cash in your hands. You got and really, so if it's going to cost you 500,000, $1 million, $1.5 million, 2, 2.5, 3, whatever figure, add $1 million onto that right away. And they go, well, I don't have that money. And I said, well, then why are you trying to buy a camp? Right away, it's called pre-offer due diligence. It's getting them in the right frame of mind. Now, there are ways that we can arrange financing and do all that, but it really, how would you say, separates those very romantic buyers from the serious buyers. And that's the key, is saying, okay, what area do you want to be in? Who do you want to serve? And I go, and the best part about my job is I get to talk. And the reason why I think I'm doing okay in this business is because I've done all the programming. When they say to me, I want to do waterfront programs, or I want to do pool programs, or I want to do canoe tripping. And I'm going to go, okay, where are you going to do that? Do you understand the logistics of that? And how far do you want to travel according to that? Because we've done all that in our business. And so, being a former camp director and having managed all those things, we're talking to them as logistically about that pre-offer programming capability is really important. And I find that many of the camp buyers are very program oriented. They're used to being up front, cheering and campfire, yay, that sort of stuff. But they aren't heavy on the organizational and operational side of their business. And so it's really educating them on aside from the programming, but it's looking at the operational side of the business and getting them to understand that they've got to manage that as well.
I also find, Rob, and before maybe Kelly has a thought on this too, is the profile over the last several years, the profile of this person you're describing, are they typically someone who comes from another profession where, like, is there a particular profile of this person you're describing here, or is it just so wide ranging? It's from, the person who was a program director who's a teacher, or is it, a professional like someone, a lawyer that wants to leave? I'm sure it's all over the place, but in recent years, because I think this education that you talk about, and we're going to talk about how it's changed over the years, but it really is, it sounds like you're really taking them through camp ownership 101. And sometimes people just end up getting sort of blinders on certain aspects of it. And it sounds like you take people through a whole sort of journey of, do you have camper care, someone for camper care? Do you have, customer service? Have you thought about that? Do you have facility? I'm just wondering, like, those topics. And I would imagine that's a pre-offer kind of discussion that you probably enter into.
Yeah, it's primarily educational, Howie, as you
Yeah.
say. It is all educational, and because I don't want to waste their time. My service is free. Like I don't get paid until there's actual property sold or a business sold, and so this is all part of my service. And I find that by providing the education and getting them to take sober second thoughts on a whole bunch of things, from area that they want to be in, from the driving capability of their driving distance for their clients to come, logistics of transportation, looking at the site itself, and where, and that's offer stage, because there's pre-offer, there's offer and due diligence, and then there is post-offer, right? So pre-offer is getting them all the education around their, around who their clients are going to be, where are they coming from? Do you have your business plan, rough business plan in place? Do you have the financing in place? Do you have the area and property style that you're looking for to match the programming that you want to do? That's all the sort of pre-offer scenario. And it ends up that I work with those folks are lawyers, there are teachers, they're not-for-profit owners or staff. They work for not-for-profit organizations, retreat center specialties. They want to do specialty things like yoga and all that sort of different, environmentalists, and they just come from a wide range of backgrounds, but they have all had some really significant camp experience with somebody that made them passionate about it. And was great, because you both as camp owners understand that you have the influence. You were influencing kids at the prime of their life. And I did that for many years as well. And so as a result, they come back 20, 30 years later, and they want to provide that experience to someone else. They just don't realize the operational side of providing that experience most of the time. And so my pre-offer due diligence is all about that. And so if we narrow down an area, we narrow down a region, if they're a day camp and want a city property, then they have to look at leased facilities for that. I mean, not everybody is fortunate to own their own land for that. Well, and I know the history of Robin Hood, in terms of what you had to do there and what Larry and Pearl went through when, they actually got, what was it? The government came in and wanted to run an airport there, and they had to give they were bought out, and then they bought back and leased back. And so, I mean, that's all part of the operational side of things. And so that occurs everywhere. If it's a city operation, do you have the capability of finding enough facilities to be able to lease, to be able to do the types of programs you want to do or buy? And most people want to try and buy right away, but they don't understand, if it's a city day camp, the cost of commercial buildings just to do something. It's just stupid. And so, that's, cost of property period is just crazy right now. But I don't know what it's like out in Minnesota or other parts, but I know in Ontario, well, in most of Canada right now, property values just skyrocketed. And so, and our infrastructure in camping in Ontario is 100 years old. And when wilderness camps were built 100 years ago, they were wilderness. Now they are part of an urban center, because that's what's happened, is they are, suburbs. Camps are now suburbs of cottage country, as they say, in the residential camps in Ontario. And what's happening with day camping. The day campings that used to take place in farms and fields around the municipal, cities and that sort of thing, are now completely encroached upon by urban growth. And it's a tough situation. So that's all part of the pre-offer, believe it or not. And we look at all those situations. And again, financing is not as big a deal as I just say, look, do you have the money? Yes or no? And if you don't have the money, then get the money first, then come back and talk to me. Because I mean, and they ask, how much do I need? I said, whatever you wish to purchase, we can try and figure out. If you have $1 million or $2 million, great. But remember to add that extra $1 million on for operational post offer.
Yeah.
Because you'll need that post offer. So am I carrying on too long, or am I okay?
No, it's good. Well, it's such a unique, I mean, camp is unique in itself, and camp ownership is unique, and buying a camp is even more unique. I mean, there's just so many things to consider. And I don't know how many camps are similar to us, but when we bought our camp, we weren't just buying camp and a business, we were buying a house. We had to sell our house and we live here. So there's this home transaction, business transaction. Okay, what are the terms if something happens to the business? We don't also lose our home. But kind of awkward because we'd still be living here if something happens to the business. But it's really complicated. And I think for us, even we almost forgot about the house piece. And I don't know that we did our due diligence as much on the house. We were so focused on the business and facility and operations that, I mean, this is embarrassing, but I don't even remember if we did an inspection on the house. I think we were just like, yeah, great, awesome. And now I'm like, I can't believe we didn't do that. So, but you're so focused on the other pieces and ensuring that, you know, everything's going well. So can you talk a little bit for us about the difference in financial versus a facility operational due diligence?
Yep. So when you go from pre-offer to offer, or finding, you know, a place, you really need to consider what you're buying. Are you going to buy an existing business? Okay, an existing camp, which is in North America, it's probably a lot easier. And I know the US market it's a lot easier to find camps for sale. Okay. Right now in Ontario, that have an existing operation going on their site. So there are, but it's what we call a share sale. So you're buying a camp business, and buying that camp business is different than, there's different due diligence for that type of business versus an asset sale. So I'm just going to buy a property and I'm going to develop a site, and I'm buying a rundown resort and I'm going to turn it into a camp. And that's an asset sale. So you're just buying the property and facilities and that sort of thing. So on the financial side of that, camp business, on the share sale of a camp, you have to do all your due diligence around the financial statements of that business, because you are taking on, in a share sale, the liabilities of the company you're buying. Okay. And so you have to get all their financial statements. You have to find all their contracts and liens against the property and all those types of things that they have as part of that. So, but on the financial side of things, it's really important that you do a thorough analysis of and bring in your accountants, bring in your specialties related to the financial analysis of that camp business that you're buying. And now, if on the asset sale, there is no business. You're not buying a business, you're buying a property. And it's just like buying a big house. You may buy a property with tons of acreage and lots of waterfront, or if there's no waterfront, it's a big field, a farm or something like that. Whatever you're buying, you just have the buildings and infrastructure on there already, and you have the land. And you're not needing to worry about the financial analysis of, you know, an operation on that land that is existing. So that's the difference between financial due diligence and with a business being purchased versus financial due diligence with just a property being purchased.
But Rob, you know, it's so unique about camp though, because in your description, like sometimes the two of them do intersect, of course, because
Mhm.
as you know, you can buy the assets,
Yep.
but the business performance, especially if you're motivated to keep clientele and keep this going from the
Mhm.
previous owners, they do intersect. So, you know, could you comment a little bit on that intersection? Because, you know, I would imagine that for a lot of people listening, you know, I grew up at this camp. They all know me. I've come back 20 years later. I'm the guy with this nickname or the person with this nickname. And they say, hey, so and so's coming back. But, you know, it's, you know, camp is so, these are emotional. I mean, this is
Mhm.
probably the most emotional purchase anyone makes in many ways,
Mhm.
you know, and especially as for those of us who've done it, we know. But could you talk about that intersection between the land, the assets, and the performance of the business, and at what time, place in time you find it? Is it on the downswing? Is it on, I mean, we previously had a guest who talked a little bit about valuation and had his own
Mhm.
opinions about that. But generally speaking, can you just talk about when those two intersect? What kind of advice do you give or things to consider?
Okay. Um, so um, if you're buying an existing business, okay, you are valuing both the, you can't value a camp based on its um, property only, nor can you buy a camp based on the value of its business, because those factors, it's one of the few things. Now, everybody on your accounting side and your financial experts will say you're either buying the business or you're buying the property. You can't mix the two. But in camps, I'm sorry, it is not the same. It's just because the two are the camp is part of the property is part of goodwill. Okay. And goodwill is a major valuation factor in buying a camp business. And so if you, and goodwill is primarily determined, and I don't know if you've had this with other other experts on, but goodwill is a factor that is based on return rate. So you look at the return rate of campers in that camp, day camp or resident camp, doesn't matter. What's the return rate? And that's the return rate of eligible campers. Now, you can't take a 14-year, let's say you have a traditional, and this is where my camp operation, as a camp director, you can't count the guy that is, or the girl or the guy at 14 or 15 who comes back into a leadership development program as part of your return rate. You gotta, the true return rate is I'm 13 and I'm coming back for another year at 14. I'm 10 and I'm coming back at 11. What's that return rate? Okay, of eligible campers who can return without any other specialty situation to deal with, because many camps have a leadership development program at 14 or 15 years of age where they narrow down a big lump of campers into a smaller lump of leaders in training, because there's only so many spots that they want to fill in the leaders in training program. That's a whole different return rate. The real return rate is eligible campers who can come back year after year after year and enjoy camp just as a camper. Okay. If that camper return rate is 80%, the goodwill is worth 5 to 10 times the value. Okay. And why is that? And the reason is because you don't have to market as heavily as you would if you have a return rate at 30% or 20% or 40%, because you're still pumping out the marketing, you're still attending the camp shows, you're still doing all that stuff because you want to increase your return rate. And you know who taught me that? It was John Latimer, Ron Johnson, and Jack Pierce, who said, work on your friggin' return rate and get your return, because Wanakita's return rate was at 50% of eligible campers. Move that up to 80% and then come and talk to us. And in 5 years, Steve and I were able to move that return rate from 50% up to 72%.
Yeah.
And of eligible campers. But that's called goodwill. And that goodwill is worth a fortune in terms of the business valuation. It's not because you can look at the financial statements and say, okay, I'm going to take these financial statements and do 2 to 3 times the value of the gross income. Okay. Or I'm going to do 7 to 10 times the value of the net income before taxes and depreciation.
Yeah.
But what's the return rate?
It's so,
And that's
yeah.
the goodwill.
Yeah, and that's really, really valuable to hear because, you know, it's important for those of us in the industry to hear so many different opinions of this piece, right, Kelly? Because, you know, we talk to lots of people who have this view. So I think that Rob's introduction of the concept of goodwill and how the business is doing is ultimately, you know, a real vital component of any overall deal. I have to tell you, Kelly, that one of the moments I best remember about my business and personal relationship with Rob is, you know, some 20 years ago, walking around the property that I subsequently purchased with a video camera, where we were looking at all the buildings. And Rob has such operational experience about the state of operations to help you with the ultimate deal that's constructed. I'm curious, Rob, if you could just chat a little bit about the exercising in assessing disrepair of elements of a property that you buy, or etc., assuming that we're doing an asset deal where you have to, you know, deal with that. But I'm just curious about any tips that you would give a would-be buyer about the value of operational. I mean, Kelly gave the example of, well, I don't think I did an inspection of my house. You know, you got to do an inspection of the camp. I know that's a big strength of yours in terms of giving advice. Any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, again, that's a whole nother podcast.
Yes.
But they essentially hire the experts. If you have the money, hire the experts. Engineering expert, you know, who will, and there are companies that do, you know, specialize in not in Canada, but in the US, I know there are companies that specialize in camp engineering assessments. So bring them in. Every building they go through, they provide you with a full engineering report on the condition of those buildings. I just spent the last 8 years working with the Girl Guides of Canada. Okay, Girl Scouts in the States, Girl Guides in Canada. And so, and, you know, have sold 17 of their camp properties in the last, and they did a full engineering report by a company who came in Ontario and did all their camps, and came in and did a full engineering report on each of their camp properties to get the current status of the business. That was pre-sale, so that we could then put it up for sale on the open market with the knowledge about what was specifically the condition of those camp buildings. Now, certainly that's one way to do it, is to bring in the engineers, bring in electricians, bring in plumbing. You have to do commercial side, because normally it's all commercial systems for larger operations. And because the director today is, you can't keep up with what's happening with the standards in building and construction. It really is almost impossible to keep up with all that. And so I know that in my real estate business, I can look at a foundation and say, okay, if you want to do winterized programming here, you're going to have to, you know, put foam insulation around that. You're going to have to put vapor barriers down. You're going to have to do yada. And I can do all that because I've done it, because I've built 2 camps to be able to understand what that means. But people of today, there are no new camps being built. I don't know. Well, there's only in Ontario specifically, and I don't know about North America, in Ontario specifically, there's only been 2 new camps built in the last 40 years. So all the rest is just old infrastructure. And when you go around to many of these operations, then that's the issue. If you're leasing facilities, then that's a whole different story, because then you really need to understand what the lease holder, or sorry, the landlord will provide in terms of maintenance, upkeep, and service. And usually what happens in a lease scenario is that the landlord is responsible from the walls out, exterior. You as the buyer or tenant are responsible from the plug, electrical plug inside. And that's traditionally how that works in commercial leases. But it could be, you have to do a full assessment of the current condition of those buildings in a lease scenario, and have an understanding that, here's my list to the landlord, and the landlord, are you going to fix this, or will this be my responsibility? As a result, I'm going to take the value of that off my lease and do it that way, and that's part of the offer process and understanding that due diligence. So mechanical is the same. Many directors don't have an understanding of the mechanical side of things, from water systems, sewage, septic. Hell, I went to university and learned all about septic systems, because I took an environmental courses related to that. And thank God I do, because I use that every day still. And I've been in the business 21 years, 22 years, and I still do this every day. I talk to people about septic systems because we live in areas where there's no municipal services. And so what does that mean? Wells, how many different types of wells can you get? And all that sort of stuff. That is bringing in the experts to help with those things are part of the due diligence, in terms of not generally, you need to know when you make your offer, but once there's an accepted offer in place, that's the 30-day to 45-day due diligence period that you need to take and examine all those systems up close and personal, because it will save you a headache full of and pocket full of change later. Does that answer that question, Howie? So
Absolutely. Yeah, Kelly?
Yeah, I really like when you said, Rob, whatever you can afford to hire. Because it's one of those, what's your time worth? And you can't be knowledgeable about every piece of it. So I really like that advice, which is kind of the next thing we want to go into, is that advice and wisdom of someone who has been through this many times. What would you pass on to others? What would be, some of that sage wisdom and experience that you might save others in the beginning, or that things that you've learned?
Well, don't be afraid to ask the questions. That's the first thing. And, if someone is selling a property and you want to run a camp there, or it's a camp business, or, you want to run a camp at some point, then you got to answer as many questions as you have, and don't be afraid to ask them, because you don't want the surprises or the liabilities that could come from not. And that's where I find I work a heck of a lot with, is getting my clients to ask the right questions and make sure that those questions are answered fully. If not, it lowers the value of that particular purchase. If they can't answer the questions, if they can't give me on that property where the sewage lines run, where the hydro lines run underground, where the water lines run underground, when was the last time, do you have a building, do you have a file? I don't know how you do files anymore, whether it's, do you have a property management maintenance system? Do you have the app? Do you have something that, when I was, before computers, when I was directing camps, I had a file on each building, and anything I did on that building, it went into that file. And there was an update every year on a checklist of how many things were in that building, how many bunk beds, how many electrical plugs, how many things, and any work that was done, when it was painted, all those things were part of that. Make sure that you get that. And many times what I find in the sale of properties is there's very little record of the facility and mechanical upgrades on that property. There's very little paperwork on that or file work on that whatsoever. And that's the biggest single advice, because it's those things that are most costly now. Hell, when I was a camp director, it was $50 a square foot to build something. Well, now it's $300 a square foot to build something, you know, and it's a whole new game out there. And you just can't put up a building for the fun of it anymore like you used to, because there are all sorts of stuff, you know, things going on. The other thing that I find now that's going on, and that this is with municipalities, is in our province, particularly camp operations, you're not allowed to do any more development on your property unless you have a registered site plan. Now, what's a registered site plan, you say? This is where you have created and worked with a site planning firm and worked with the municipality in mapping out all the facilities on your property and putting future facilities in there for any new things you may want to do in the future, submitting that to the municipality for approval, and then the municipality approving that. And so when you go to develop the property in the future, there is already a pre-existing site plan on site that, or in the municipality, which says, oh yeah, you have a site plan. It says you wanted to do that. You're now doing it. Great. You're approved. Go ahead.
Is there a similar process in counties in the States, Kelly, that you're aware of, where I mean, obviously building permits and things of that kind, but you know, Rob's getting to sort of more like a longer term vision and of development and stuff like that on your existing property. Are you familiar with that at all?
Not, you know, well, I am and I'm not. I would say that there are some cities around us, like I can think of one particularly, Lake Elmo, that definitely have a lot more, I would say, you know, they want a lot more say in the things that are happening in their city versus others take a laid back approach. But there's also in the metropolitan area, like the Met Council, and they really monitor how much of certain things are in a city, how much land, the things that are going on. But it sounds like you have another level of that where you are than we do.
Well, I think, yeah.
Sorry, Howie, I would just suggest to any camp owner across North America, the best thing you can do right now is be preventative. Other words, municipalities are doing nothing but counties, municipalities, townships, however you want to describe them, are getting in your business. and they will not back off. It will not decrease over the next little while. And in the preventative approach to this is creating a site plan that will take into account current development on site, mapping the whole 9 yards, spending the money to get that done, and look at potential development of other parts of the site in the future. Because all that, and get that approved by the municipality, get it on their books anyway, and then, well, we sent that to you and you guys stamped it. Great, away we go, you know, and that prevents the answer of no down the road, because municipalities are great at just saying no to anything that you want to do. And so, and in terms of valuation and due diligence, a camp with a site plan approved is worth gold. It's absolutely gold. and it is worth $100,000 more, because that's what that site plan will cost you in the long run to develop. That 100,000 is the best money you could spend in the future if you've got 100,000 to spend. It's the same for a day camp operation where they own their own land, and they may want to put other pools in, or they may want to put other facilities in. It's get it all done up and approved beforehand, and then away you go, and it's a lot easier in the long run. So that's that part of that advice, if anything. That's what I'm seeing. The other thing I'm seeing for those camps that own waterfront, and I don't know what it is like in parts of North America, but in Ontario, who owns the waterfront? I don't know if you've had somebody on the podcast who've asked that question. No. And
No,
so,
yeah, well, it's a good question, right? Because it just goes to depending on how much you share a lake or whatever your water is. I think you're getting to that, Rob, which is really, really, really valuable to know. It's basically knowing your site map and knowing where you begin and other people end and other people begin for sure. And that's often done at a certain stage in your deal that you make with the previous owner, so you can know that that's obviously part of pre-offer is knowing what you're actually buying, which is
yeah.
I think part of the advice that you're giving. Kelly, this has been like really valuable stuff. What a we're inching down the road of these topics that I think gives lots of different perspective for our listeners around the world of buying camps. So Rob has really given us things to to flood our brain with, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
we needed a court reporter transcriber to
Yeah.
type out everything that he said in a little
Yeah.
guidebook.
Yeah.
No, that was great. That was
If-
really,
if-
really great, Rob. So thank you.
If I could ask just one further thing, is that most camps now sell with the vendor, the seller, taking back a mortgage because you can't get the financing from traditional financing sources. So it's your due diligence is satisfying the seller that you can run the business so he continues to be paid his retirement. Essentially that's what the issue is. And so you as the buyer of the camp need to satisfy the seller if he or she or that business is going to take back a substantial mortgage in some capacity or help fund you, then you've got to satisfy that person that you say are, and you're going to do what you're going to do. And that's the other thing. The other thing about buying operations, due diligence, is that if you're going with any traditional financing from banks and that sort of stuff, they're going to want to see all the pro formas. They're going to want to see an environmental assessment. They're going to want to see an engineering assessment, and they're going to want to see septic and water and all that sort of stuff. So that's part of that due diligence that goes along with getting money from a traditional banking source. And traditional banking means one of the big banks, as opposed to a private lender.
That's a huge part. You got to be able to keep it going and pay
Yep.
who you bought it from and be successful and for yourself. So
Yep. Yep.
the pressure is real, Rob. The pressure is real. But it's great. It's a good thing. It's a very good thing. Great. So I am going to, speaking of making sure people are, being taken care of, I'm going to take care of our next sponsor ad. We want to give a big shout out to Camp Brain. Thank you for sponsoring our podcast. They have been in the camp software industry since 1994. They have 45 dedicated staff to meet your every need. As I shared in the last podcast, I am a new Camp Brain user. And so I've gotten to know many of those new staff members, and I'm working on my staff application right now. And it's so exciting to see the different functionalities of things that I can do, where I can not have certain areas have to be filled out for my returning staff. And I can make a different application for my maintenance director versus a counselor. So there's so many exciting things that you can do. And I appreciate very much the customer service. They are so responsive thus far. I hope they're prepared for lots of questions when my registration opens. But I would have to say so far it's been fantastic. So I would definitely recommend them. Check them out if you are looking for a new software or to make a switch. You can look at their website at campbrain.com or call 866-485-8885. Howie.
Yes, thank you, Kelly. Rob, this is a moment in our show as we near the end of our episode to talk a little bit about what's inspiring us these days, and maybe it's a book or a quote that you refer to on a regular basis. I thought Kelly and I would start us off and give you a chance to share a thought about something that you'd like to share with the audience. I'll get things going. Just as I've mentioned in the past, I'm pretty motivated by the conversations that I'm having with interested staff in returning, and we've talked a lot about the importance of staffing for 2022, and am so impressed with the viewpoint of leadership that everyone is bringing to these conversations. And I hope everyone is feeling the same way with their own conversations. It reminds me of the book that I've read and was reminded of recently, and that's the Simon Sinek book, Leaders Eat Last. And Leaders Eat Last is a wonderful book. If you haven't read it, please check it out. It just talks about our ability to role model and just the influence we have on the people around us on a daily basis. So that's my inspiration. If you haven't read it, many people are familiar with it. Check it out again. It just came across my mind recently, and I wanted to share. Kelly, what's on your inspiration list these days?
Howie, I'm curious to know if you've ever taken one of these, but have you ever taken an Enneagram personality test to know what your Enneagram is?
I've done
Oh,
similar things. Yes, yes.
yes.
There's a few out there.
Yeah, so it's similar to like a Myers-Briggs or a strength test, but the Enneagram, one of my counselors, actually someone that I hired on to be working for me year-round for the first time, we were talking, she is very into Enneagrams, and so she was encouraging me to take that. So I have a little link to take a free test because I think it's always interesting to understand how you work and how you work with others and understanding what their Enneagram is and your strengths and weaknesses and your blind spots, your kryptonite, but also your, things that you're most passionate about. So I'm gonna put the little link in here because I think that's a very interesting thing as a leader to understand yourself is a great, great gift. So that's what I'm
Yeah.
going to put in here today, Howie.
Yes, please do. They're always, I mean, periodically, I think we should all be doing that. It just sort of gives us a sense of what we're thinking about. So I'm glad you brought that up. That's awesome. And Rob, any inspiration, anything that you'd like to share with the audience that's inspired you?
I have been inspired beyond belief by my 23-year-old niece. She was a really up and coming athlete and scholar, and had a car accident and was, injured quite badly with head injury and other things like that. And she spent and that was when she was 17. And she spent the last 6 years recovering and finally got a settlement. And in that insurance settlement, she has started, and she's back and doing okay, but she has not been able to continue her education or do anything. Instead, she has started up the Georgian Bay Food Network, and she has started a food bank and a private not-for-profit organization that distributes food to the needy in our community with that settlement money. Didn't take it any much for herself, but she has put it all into the Georgian Bay Food Network and is the executive director of a new organization that provides food for the needy. And she is just an amazing girl. I just am every day thankful that she is who she is.
Wow, that is really, really amazing. And I'm glad she's really sounds like she's doing great and doing such good, valuable work. So thanks for sharing that, Rob. Rob, if anybody wants to connect with you and pick your brain on the topics we were talking about, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Just email, and that's Rob Hemming, ROBHEMING, 1M, not two, 1M, Rob Hemming at Rogers, ROGERS.com. So Rob Hemming at Rogers.com. And Howie, if you wish to put my phone number up there, that's fine too, 705-321-4924. No worries, I'm available to anybody to talk camp because I love talking camp.
That's awesome. Thank you, Rob. And Kelly, how do people get a hold of you?
Best way is my email, Kelly with a Y at hiddenpinesranch.com.
Amazing, amazing. And you can find me at Howie at camprobinhood.ca. Please don't forget that you can find all of our show notes at gocamp.pro/ownerspod. You can find the resources that we mentioned in this episode and lots of good stuff there from our show and other great Go Camp Pro podcasts out there. We really hope you enjoyed this episode. Rob, thank you so much for all of this insight. I know that Kelly, who's a very good note taker, was writing down a lot of good stuff there. So we really appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing all of you and having you listen to the next Camp Owners podcast. Have a great day, everybody.